are just a couple of seats left, and I've never experienced this before, so let me take a quick selfie with all of you, because this is a bucket list moment for me. So if you could all make it a happy moment. Thank you so much. And that gives you some time to get accustomed to my voice as well, and it also allows me to ease up into the speaking thing. I'm super happy to be here. I'm super happy that you're here. Let's get started. Let's first start by introducing myself. This is me. You can recognize me, because if I do like this, I should look very similar to this picture. I hope. My name is Joran. Nice to meet you. I'm a web developer. I'm also an author, coach, and speaker. I do a lot of things. I used to work on the design system for our organization, which led me to investigating the contents, which I'll try to present today as well. You can follow me on the internet if you like. Don't promise any gems, but you can do that. I will share the slides, by the way, via Twitter or X or however you want to call it. So that might be useful. I have a wife, I have kids, and I have a cat. That's it about me. There's one thing about me as well. I'm just an average developer from an average company, which means it's for you as well. You can still leave, I think, but it's good to realize that I'm not a CSS specialist or expert. I'm not a Google developer expert. I'm not in the CSS working groups. I'm not working on browser engines. I just work with the web, and I think that goes with a lot of you here today, at least I hope, otherwise you know more than I do. And then I invite you to come onto the stage and do this talk for me, and then I'll take your seat. So bottom line, I'm just a regular Joe who just happens to share his journey on CSS discoveries. So if you were planning on following me for CSS tips, you're out of luck. A bit about context. I told you a bit about me and my average developer. I also work for an average company. I work for Jumbo. You might know them. They're a supermarket. So we don't do tech as a primary means of making money. We sell groceries. We sell cucumbers. We sell bananas. We're not a tech company. So that has some implications to how we use tech. It means that we don't have indefinite funding to do tech research or to leverage new tech or to develop stuff. We just don't dedicate all of our company's resources into the tech. So that affects the way that we use tech and adopt it in our organization. And again, I'm hoping that this resonates with at least a couple of you. If not, feel free to join me on stage and we'll make it a happy show. What I also notice is that with all of the emerging frameworks that most of us, I hope, have been using, is that aim is more focused at JavaScript progression or TypeScript, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. But not necessarily at CSS. So we're in this space where we don't have all of the resources dedicated into investigating or using tech. We're just using it to fulfill our business needs. So I hope that you can get this picture. Now we have CSS as another part of our puzzle. CSS has a couple of nice contradictions. It's very easy to learn, but it is very difficult to master. Everybody can write, but collaboration can be very hard and very tedious. And it is immensely easy to mess things up. And debugging can be challenging as well. So the things about CSS. CSS also has some benefits, so that's really good. But these properties of how we used to write or how we're writing CSS, they typically lead to maintenance becoming harder and harder when dealing with CSS. So organization is key if you want to succeed in maintaining your code base. Otherwise, you'll end up in this sort of situation. And we all know this meme, right? And I think I know why it speaks volumes to us. Because it can be so easy to mess things up, you will end up like this frustrated Peter Griffin here. And again, I think that the causes are that we are starting... yeah, he's not done. He will be done in a few seconds. That we started to leverage the frameworks more and more, not necessarily the CSS. So that led us to drift away, he's still not done, from one of the main pillars of the web, which is CSS, of course. There he is. So this can lead to even lower maintenance or lower investment on maintaining CSS code. On the other hand, so there's good news as well. In preparation of a talk, I was reading a couple of blog posts and investigating CSS and the CSS4 spec and properties. I also got the CSS, a state of CSS survey. I'm not sure if anybody of you is getting it, but I was seeing more and more exotic concepts in there, which didn't make sense to me at the time. So I was in the headspace of, I see these new features, or I see this one cool feature, but what is it going to do for me? Or what does this one good feature warrant for me refactoring a code base? And it took me a while before it clicked, because there are other things going on as well. Because browser vendors, apart from killing PWAs, as Bruce introduced us a couple of meetings ago, they are cranking out support for the new features at a high pace, at a really good pace. The browser update strategies, they are much more reliant than they used to be. I used to be in the space where I needed to support IE11. So it's done. That's buried, and we can forget about it. And the environment where our web apps and websites run, they are also a lot more stable than they used to be. So that's really good news. And we also have the CSS working group, and they are cranking out new features as well. And they're doing this together with the browser vendors, but also together with developers. So the way that they are introducing new features is spot on with a good developer experience, which eases into, so it helps you ease into those new features really easily. Well, that's what it means. On top of that, we also have a lot of new tools, frameworks, meta frameworks. The days of the complicated Webpack configurations are gone, or you are maintaining legacy code bases. That can happen as well. But you're not writing new Webpack configs, I hope. Most of those frameworks and meta frameworks, they have excellent guardrails as well to help you make good decisions or get you started at a quick pace. Even CI/CD implementations are getting much and much better. So we're in a very comfortable space right now, where development gets easy sometimes. We can even leverage AI, but I'm not sure if that's the wise approach. I'm not here to talk about AI. But it does mean that we can shift our focus to CSS. So I was working on showcasing the current state of CSS for a certain talk, and the more and more I realized I had knowledge gaps. So what this talk has turned into is sort of a confession. This is me coming clean to all of you. Because I was seeing more and more things that I didn't know. And I'm hoping to show you that the things I didn't know, I'm not the only one. You probably also don't know all of the new CSS features. But it is good to realize this and to take action once you identify this. So we will do, we changed the title a bit. So these will be my confessions. And then we'll update the title of the talk as well. Things I didn't know CSS can do. But now I do. I learned some things, and I want to share those as well. Let's get started. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at a lot of examples. I can't cover everything in the CSS spec because it's simply too much. So I will highlight a couple of features. There will be some demos. I know that all of those demos will not be applicable to your situation. So I made them easy. That's also easy for me. So let's get started. Why not? Let's first start with a couple of no-brainers. They are very easy to implement. Support is super good these days of all of the things I'll show you. And they make your life a little easier. And they make your code a bit happier. And happy code means happy developers. So let's start with a couple of features here. We have the logical properties first. I'm not sure if anybody heard of them, but this is a fix in CSS, actually. I have to explain a bit about this because CSS was built with the English language in mind. And as seeing most of you here, we are all reading, I have to be good about it, so left to right, top to bottom. Yeah. It's easy to mess these things up. But that's the way that CSS was built, with the English language in mind. So English reading direction, or our Western reading direction. That's not always the case if you look at different cultures. The reading direction is not always left to right, top to bottom. For Arabic, for instance, the reading direction is right to left. There we go. And for Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or Mongolian, the direction is vertical. So those properties of margin right, margin top, they don't make a lot of sense if you flip the reading direction. And if you have ever worked on a website which had to support multiple directions, you know that this is an issue. An issue. This was actually something that's wrongly introduced in CSS, in my opinion. So logical properties are the answer for this. Yeah, indeed. And also, I noticed when I was working on the slides that I still have a couple of old definitions in my slides, which we will see some further examples, but feel free to correct me if you see them. This will train you and me as well. We can have a quick look at these because they, I think you should be using them from, as soon as you leave this door, you should be using or thinking about using logical properties, because it's actually very simple. Instead of the horizontal direction coming from the English way of doing things, think inline. And instead of vertical, think block. And then you have your start and ends to mark the sides of the direction. And then it would be very easy to take this card, for example, and I think the code is readable by everybody. So we see a width, we see a margin right, we see a padding top. And instead of using those old properties, we simply change it to inline size, margin inline end, padding block start. It's a small change. It doesn't affect the way that the UI is rendered, but it makes your code a lot more flexible, and it makes actually a bit more sense, because this is the way that all cultures visiting your site or using your reading direction would able to access it in a proper way. So it's not hard. It's very easy. You can find and replace your code probably and have this done within hours. But this is something that I think you should be doing. Because what we're doing here is assuming that we have a left to right direction, but this could very easily change to a right to left. And trust me that there's a thing going on there with changing, but it only changes the direction. And this would still be valid CSS, so we don't have to change all of those things depending on the direction. I hope that this makes sense to all of you. Another one, which is again a no-brainer, is nesting. We all know nesting, I suppose. If you ever use a CSS compiler, or if you're writing JavaScript or even HTML, nesting already exists, but it's now also supported natively in CSS. So I'm not going to read this out loud because it's just so straightforward that I can just show you this. That's it. This should be very familiar if you ever use the compiler, but we have an H2 there, which has a style definition, and we have a H2 nested in a card, which gets a different style definition. It's as easy as that. I can't make this any more complex, so you can use this as well. Another addition to things that we already had in CSS is subgrid. This is very useful if you have pesky designers with difficult layouts. Again, there's a lot of text. I'm not going to go through all of this because I'll share the slides later on. But subgrid is the logical progression of the grid that we already had. The good thing is that if you start using a subgrid, then it takes the properties of the grid automatically. So say you have a 12-column grid. If you have a subgrid in there, it will also default to that 12-column grid. If it's an 8-column, it will default to the 8-column grid. This I will show you. I promised a couple of code examples. Cover your eyes. It's not pretty. Boom. There it is. But this is something that tends to happen when we're working on applications. Not necessarily with this text, and especially, let's see, where's my mouse? There we are. Oh, this is going to be difficult. I was going to do the code editing on the, let's see how it works. But so this is a pattern which we should be familiar with. We have a couple of columns here, and they all have similar markup, right? They have an H1, they have a paragraph of text, and for some reason, the contents of this H1 is very long, which leads to, well, a very long H1. And let me, oh my gosh. So this is the subgrid in effect. I should have done this the other way around, because then you would have been impressed. But if I remove this, refresh please, yes. So this is what we would normally have. This is familiar to us. This is what we are dealing with. And then we have to either decide how long should that H1 be, or how much space can it take. With subgrid, there we go. So prepared for the applause. We can do this. And it just works. Yes, thank you. But as you can, it's very simple to do. There's another thing I forgot to mention at the beginning. These specs, you can look them up. I will share the resources, but I'm not going to list all of the specs and ways of writing these, because you are perfectly capable of doing this yourself. So do your homework. Otherwise, it would just take too long. And I don't even have enough time, I think, to cover all of the slides that I prepared. So let's see how I end up. On to the next one. There we go. Selectors. Yes, we have new selectors. Again, I'm not going to highlight all of them, but I will highlight a couple of cool ones. And I think this is the coolest, the is selector. So this, again, is a very typical pattern we used to apply, or at least I used to apply. I'm not sure if you do the same. But, oh, shoot, I again have to do something here. I should have practiced it a bit better. But here we have a couple of definitions with a section, article, aside, nav, and an H1 in it. Not sure why it should be in a nav, but there you go. Well, this is very lengthy and descriptive, but it can be shorter with the is selector. Let's see if this works. See, I can use my clicker. So we can group things with the is selector. So we can group the first part of the selector, and it can be a section, article, aside, nav, or whatever, and then have the H1 definition. So this shortens the way we write our CSS. But there's something even cooler with what you can do with the is selector. And now it doesn't work. Oh, it does work. It doesn't work here. So now I'm not running. Okay, I'll try to do it like this. Sorry for this. So there's something cooler. This unsupported pseudo class, I made it up. It doesn't exist. But browsers have issues with those unsupported pseudo classes. A normal browser would not be able to apply the styling that's in there to the button or custom input because there's an unsupported selector there. The thing with the is selector, which makes it really nice, is that by grouping them, the browser is able to interpret the button. It will be able to interpret the custom input. It will just skip over the unsupported one and will start applying those style rules, which I'm not sure if they make any sense, but it will apply them to the button and the custom input. So grouping them with the is selector is actually a good failsafe for writing bleeding edge CSS sometimes. And this is very useful if you are styling the experimental features of CSS. So I think this is very cool. I'm guessing most of you are already familiar with this one, but I had to mention the has selector because it allows us to traverse and look in and down the CSS tree. So here we are selecting an article which has a highlight inside of the article. Would have been very difficult without this has selector. You would have needed JavaScript in order to achieve something like this, but with the has selector we can just target that highlight. And it gets even better because, again, we can group selectors in that has selector. And it gets even better because we can also target the hero image, which is part of the article that has a highlight or a hero image. So that's awesome. And then text wrapping. And this is also something you can, as soon as you walk out the door, you can add this to your code base. You get these tips for free. For a headline, just use text wrap balance. For a paragraph text, use text wrap pretty, and you get the word break auto phrase as a bonus. But what this does is it allows the browser to determine, and the browser is excellent in determining what it needs to render and how much space it has to render. It knows it much better than we do, but it allows the browser to decide where to break words or where to break words. And what it does with the headline is that the balance one is that it makes sure that there are less orphans. So the headline will be formatted perfectly in the space that it can occupy. And for the paragraphs too, it will try to reduce orphans, which are like the last word of a paragraph. It just spills over to the next line. It will re-render those so that there might be 2 words or 3 words, so that paragraph has a much more aesthetic appeal. So start using those as well. Now I can get rid of the fact that most of us are using frameworks to build websites these days. I think it's over 90% of all of the websites, they are built using a framework, apart from a couple of side projects. So there are also implications or things you can use if you're using a component-based architecture, which is really nice as well. First one is scoping, and again, scoping is something that you should be familiar with if you have ever used a framework or JavaScript or anything. It actually also is, in a way, part of the CSS spec already. Targeting classes, the specificity also is sort of a way of scoping things. Yeah, I can just show you this as well, how this works, because this, again, is really cool. What we do here, or what we see here, is a very typical HTML pattern. We have a card, we have a title, and there's a slot in there. And in the slot, we should be able to place anything, right? Well, what happens if you style the card? Anything that goes in the slot gets those styles as well. So what we can do with, there are some highlights here. So yeah, this is the pattern. And what we can do is we can define a scope for our styles to be applied to. So this scope here runs from the card to the slot. So you style effectively, you style this. And then what you do is you can apply all of the styles that you want. You write them in that scope, which means that you have a slot which doesn't get any styles, which is perfect for a reusable pattern, which doesn't get influenced by all of those styles from its parent. There we go. There's a quick example here. This is a donut. Alternative donut, I have to say, and I have to do my mouse magic again. So this pattern, which I just shown you, is called a donut pattern. And the reason is because what we are creating here effectively is a yummy donut, which is the yellowish colored thing. And there's a hole in the donut, and the hole is the thing that's not styled. So let's have a look at the CSS quickly. So here we see some markup. Here we define the scope that runs from the donut to the hole. And as you can see, we have defined that the scope of the donut should have a color hot pink. What you also see is that this text here is not in the hot pink color, it is in white. So this is a good example, or this is a nice pattern to use if you are working with component-based solutions or component-based patterns. So good to remember this. I didn't see any donuts on the event floor today, but it's a yummy pattern. Another one which is very interesting and also should be familiar in a way is the cascade layers. So cascade layers were already part of CSS as well. So I'm not bringing a lot of news today, unfortunately, but we have a bit more control here. So they were already there. The user agent style sheet, that was a cascade layer. The user settings, that was a cascade layer. And the author style sheet is also a cascade layer. How you would use them, the user agent, you know this because you used to write a reset.css to combat all of these style sheet settings. The user settings, they might be less familiar, but this is what the user has set as a default font size or whatnot. So that affects your UI as well. And then the author style sheets, that's where we tend to work. But there's a bit more control added to the author style sheets. We're getting layers in the author style sheets as well. And why is that a big deal? So these layers, they determine the specificity of your selectors and of the styles that get applied. And the order of which the layers get defined determines the actual styling that gets applied to certain elements. And again, why is this important? Yeah, well, this is really awesome. So CSS is a cascading definition of styles. We all know that sometimes breaks. Having a bit more control over that full cascade helps us in writing better code, and also allows us to get a bit more control over things that we use by third parties, team members, more team members who mess up your work. And now you can isolate those changes. And this is what it looks like. These are a couple of ways of defining a cascade layer. So what we see here is that at the first statement, this one, this would be an example of importing a third-party library. And most of you have probably done this. And this is very, can I say this, shitty to combat if you're working on a user interface. You're getting some global CSS and it applies to everything that you're working on. If you use it like this, then you import that third-party CSS into its own layer, which allows you to have much more control over where those styles get applied. And you can also create your own layers by just defining them. And again, this is important because the order of definition defines the way that the specificity cascades throughout your styling. So what we see here, keep this one in mind. We have a utils layer here. We just define it. We don't do anything with it. Over here we have a base layer, and we do immediately define an H1 with a Comic Sans font family because I was being stupid. What happens here is, again, we add we open up the utils layer, and we can even nest those, so I can organize my code much better with adding a typography layer, for instance, and I can overwrite the base layer, which succeeded the utils layer, by fixing it and adding a new font family and also making it red. So I'm still not doing a good job aesthetically wise, but I have much more control over what gets applied where. And when you are working with other teammates, when you are dealing with third-party code, this is very helpful. Cascade layers. So more for the component-based approach, dynamic sizing. Let's have a look. So we have a couple of functions here which allow us to do a bit more calculations. My favorite here is clamp because it has a bit more flexibility than the min or max, but they allow you to specify formulas or calculations in how a component or element should be sized. I think I have an example for this. Again, the code, the UI is rubbish, but at least I am able to show you what is going on. So here we have a placeholder for a gorgeous image. There's a headline, there's some text. Let's go over here. So here we're saying that, I should have renamed this. Here we're saying that this style, the size of this element should be clamped to a minimum of 80 pixels, a maximum of 320 pixels, and anything in between, it should take up roughly 50% of the space of that parent element. So that means that if I change the parent element from 500 to, well, let's make it 50, then my, update please, thank you, then my gorgeous placeholder will still get that minimum of 80 pixels of inline size. I'm not using width, I'm using inline size. And also, if I make it really wide, like 1,000, 5,000, I don't know, doesn't really matter, then the maximum is 300 pixels inline size. So this is how you would use clamp. And again, this is very useful if you are building patterns which can live anywhere on a UI or on a page. But we can do better. Now I have to again move my cursor to the right screen. With container queries. Container queries are, again, an extension of something that we are probably familiar with, the viewport queries or media queries. But this is much more useful because now we can query elements and decide how to render anything within those elements on a page. Media queries, they tend to just look at the viewport. So they are very useful for determining how a layout should render, but not necessarily a component or an element or a pattern. With container queries, we can. Yeah, so it is very good to realize that in this case, and the spec sometimes changes, I'm defining a container here, and I'm telling the browser that the browser can query its inline size and decide what to do based on that. It's good to note that that container is an HTML element, but I should not do anything else with it other than signaling that this is a container which can be queried to determine its dimensions. So don't add any styles to it apart from that. Inside or not inside, I just define a cart element here or a cart pattern which has a flex direction. And then to use container queries, I can target that cart container and say if that has a, there is my error, that should be max inline size, of course. Thank you for correcting me. But if that is if that has a max width of 400 pixels, change the flex direction of the column. So for reusable patterns, oh shoot, I have a couple of highlighting things. So yeah, this is my story. Again, I have a gorgeous example. What you see here, cursor magic. These patterns here are exactly the same. I have a container wrapper, 3 cards with exciting text. Same here. I have a container wrapper, 3 cards with exciting text. The one thing that's different is the constraint. So this container, as I said, I'm not applying any styles, but I am going to tell the browser with CSS that it can use that container to query its dimensions. That's what I do here. So it's the same as the example I showed you before. So So there are a couple of definitions here, but the magic happens here. So we have our smaller constraint one, which is the top, has a width of 300 pixels. So if I change this, then the container query should get executed, and now it renders them in a different way, right? So this is, again, very useful for patterns, cards, anything that you want to be able to reuse and put them anywhere in a layout or in a UI, and have the element decide how it should render. So in terms of components, this is magic and super helpful. And on top of that, we also get container units. So these are new units which are added to the CSS spec, and they allow us to better query the values of that container. Next up, and this is where it's getting fun. And I also don't understand what's going on with the colors. So brace yourself. There we go. Why do we need this? And this is also going to test the projector later on. So I'm very curious how this will end up. Otherwise, you can come look at my screen. But that's the key, right? We have newer screens these days, and our laptops are modern mobile devices. They can display much more colors than the classic RGB that runs from 0 to 255. So we need a way to address those new colors. That's where color functions come in. I hope you're ready. So these are a couple of new ways of defining color. I don't know what the heck is going on here. I see Rec 2020 A89-RGB Pro Photo RGB XYZ. It sounds made up. But they actually exist, trust me. I put a source there, so I'm not the one to blame. But we'll take a look at the P3 color space, because that's where it gets important. And we'll do that by using the OKLCH. We need to come up with better names, I think. I'll try to do a demo, and now we're going to test the projector. Oh yes, it works. So I hope that you can all see this clearly. But as you can see, this is the RGB color space, and this is an example of the P3 color space. And one of the things that immediately stand out is that particularly the green is much wider here in the P3 color space. There are mathematical reasons for this, and I'll try to explain them while I don't understand them myself, so bear with me. This is a representation of the P3 color space in relation to sRGB or RGB. So what we see on this side of all of those graphs is the classical RGB color space. And on the right-hand and top, including the bottom, that's P3. So what you can see is that on the red color space, you have a lot more in the P3 range. Blue, not so much, but green makes makes a big difference. And again, there's a reason for this. And now we're getting to the really exciting stuff. So there's a good visual representation of colors, because colors are weird. They are not linear per channel in this case. And I can visually show this to you by showing you this. So this is a 3D model representing color ranges. And as you can see, they are called color ranges because it actually resembles a mountain range. What we clearly see is that there are very large differences sometimes between colors, and the gradients are all over the place. But this is a better representation of the color space than RGB is able to project, because RGB is just linear. You have red channels 0 to 255, green 0 to 255, blue 0 to 255. You cannot do this with RGB. You can do this with the other new colors. Now I have to, so bye-bye, mountain range. I was really impressed by that rendering, by the way. So let's see what we can do. Yeah, why would we even bother? Well, with those new color features, indeed, they do support the P3 color. So if you want to present your user interface using much more vivid colors and also have much more control over the color space, you should be starting using those guys. And believe it or not, the OKLCH is actually much more readable once you get used to it. because the LCH, let's start there. I think that's on the next slide, by the way. Yeah, there we are. So LCH stands for lightness, which is something we can very much understand. It's chroma, which is a bit difficult to understand given the range of 0 to 0.37, but again, mass, I don't know. But chroma means the amount of black, white, or gray mixed in with the color. So it's kind of comparable with saturation, but also completely different. And sorry, yeah, I don't make this up. And U is just the degree or the angle on the color wheel, basically. So we all know a rainbow, then you can calculate the U. That's pretty straightforward. There's actually a really good blog post by Evil Martians on why they are moving everything away from RGB and HSL to LCH. So the example that I have is not as sexy as I would want it to have, but here we are. So these are two gradients. What it does show, oh wow, both look horrible. You can look at my screen if you want later on, but what I was trying to show, that's why I think this was a risky move to introduce this today, is that legacy definition, which is using hex values, basically the same as RGB. I'll show, oh wait, I can show the code right on. It renders uglier in this case than this guy, which is using the OK LCH notation. You have to get used to this, but once you get used to it, it becomes much more readable. But I hope that this at least makes it clear. It doesn't, sorry. That this modern gradient actually looks a lot smoother on my device, and it will on your device as well. That's about testing the projector. I promised I would do that. We have another couple of features related to color, but I'm going to speed up a bit. Otherwise, we'll go into overtime. So we can now also start to mix colors on the fly. So we can take a primary color and then start to mix it in. Again, I'm using sRGB because I did this slide prior to all of my color investigations. It is what it is. But you can use this as well to, let's go further, to generate color schemes. Again, I would not use RGB anymore for this. If you read the blog post by Evil Martians, you will understand, I hope, that the OK LCH is much more suitable of generating color schemes. But this is, can I show this quickly? So this is generated based on a base color. So if I change this to white, then let's see what happens. And see, so I can generate my own palette with these color functions on the fly. But again, don't use RGB, use LCH for this. Whoop. So we're learning. I'm learning as well as you are. Last topic at least is animation. So this is getting a bit more traction on the internet because it's much more sexy than all of the other ones. So I just added scroll-driven animations because it's mandatory, but I think you get enough exposure of these features. So we'll quickly have a look at something that I didn't even create. Bramus did. He's also in the resources. And what this does basically is using the browser again to render everything for you. So let's see if we can render this or make this. So see the animation. Wow. Awesome. But the awesome part here is that it is using CSS. And that means that the browser is not using the JavaScript thread to render these animations. It can even go up. See? But this is based on scrolling, and there are more features and more capabilities. So investigate this. You will probably encounter more on social media and whatnot. I just wanted to show you this. Follow Bramus van Dam. He is an expert on creating these demos. He's also the one who created this one. But this is plain CSS animating. So it frees up the thread for JavaScript so that you have more time to build inefficient JavaScript applications. Now, we have all learned a couple of things, at least I did. And trust me, there is a lot more to uncover. I did not, there's a list here. So I did not cover view transitions. I did not cover anchor positioning. I did not cover the popover API. I did not cover stylable select dropdowns. I did not cover form field sizing. So there's a lot more coming to the CSS spec. And I think we should all be aware of this and keep up. First things to consider is, should you start to adopt these? Well, a couple I already mentioned. You should. Because they are either fixes for broken CSS or misinterpreted rules coming from English language, but also sometimes a quick fix. So you should definitely start to adopt a couple of these features. Should you adopt all of them? I don't know. I can't decide that for you. I also won't take the blame for this. So there are also a couple of things to consider, and this goes obviously for everything that you want to implement or change in your code. These are basically the things you should be concerned about. What's the browser support? It changes. I was saying that browser vendors are very keen on pushing new features and supporting them, but not at an equal pace. So some are lagging behind, some are really far ahead. Apple, for instance, is very far ahead on the colors because they make beautiful displays, they want to sell them, but it differs. So check your metrics, make sure that your visitors are able to cover your new features. If not, use a polyfill. For most of the features I've shown, polyfills are available, sometimes in JavaScript, so that means less performance, but it is what it is. And if not, you can still use the cascade, of course, because that's one of the powers of CSS. You can gracefully degrade your experience or progressively enhance, depending on where you stand in that field, to make sure that every visitor gets a meaningful experience. And the other one is you should consider is what's the impact on my development process? Because not everything that you will add, you don't want to refactor all of your code just to add meaningless changes to your code. But what you can do is it's perfect, you can iterate progressively. You can start adding small fixes, like the logical properties find and replace. It's very easy to do. And again, here, you can leverage the cascade. So you just slide in the new features in front of your existing CSS, and as soon as it's supported, it will be used. Now, what about those experimental features? As I said, not everything is in the spec is definitive. I was working with the anchor positioning, and overnight the whole API changed, and I had to refactor all of it. Prepare to refactor. So use these experimental features. You can probably turn on a browser flag and try to experiment and see what it does for you or for your visitors. And then you get some early access to features. So you can try them out and see what the effect is, so that you're ahead of the curve a bit. And again, you can use the cascade in CSS to make sure that you progressively enhance or gracefully degrade the experience. Why would you do this? It's very simple. CSS is a core web technology. Like JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, they're the backbone of the internet. CSS is part of the browser. So you don't need any packages or ship any packages in order to interpret CSS. The browser can do that for you. It's very handy. CSS will always be supported. It has backwards compatibility back to CSS1, I believe. And it's a core web technology, so we should really be using CSS for the things it can support, or the things it supports. There's more, of course. So organizing your code in a better way may reduce the amount of CSS you have to write, which means you may reduce the amount of CSS you have to ship. And for animations or things that we used to rely on JavaScript for, count elements on a container or resize them, animate them. That happened in the JavaScript thread, blocking all of the other operations going on there. If you use CSS, you use the GPU, which has much more performance, which indeed increases the performance of your app. So, do we love CSS? I don't know. Kilian Valkov, he's in progress. That's over there, I think. And his talk is your least favorite language, and it's about CSS. It's sort of a love-hate relationship. It can do a lot of things, and if we spend a bit more time and effort on understanding how it works and what it can do for us, I think we can fall in love with CSS again. And here we go. These are the promised resources. I will share the slides on my socials, so you can follow me there. And I thank you for your time. Awesome.